Okay. Hi, everyone, and welcome to our discussion on Jesus's life as an example of living A Course in Miracles. I'm Emily Bennington, and I'm here today with Robert Perry, and we have something very special planned for you today. There are many different aspects of Jesus's life that can be used to demonstrate course principles. And so when Robert and I first started pulling this conversation together, we were wondering how we were going to take such a big idea and narrow it down into something manageable. This year, we are reading the text of the course according to the calendar year schedule. And for those of you who are doing the same, you may recall that last week we covered the last section of chapter 4, which contains the truly helpful prayer. And we were still trying to figure out the right angle for our discussion today. And so after we read the truly helpful section, Robert said, what if we used Jesus's life as a way to demonstrate the principles of the truly helpful prayer? So in other words, what if we went line by line through the truly helpful prayer and showed how Jesus's life exemplified each and every one? And so that's what we're going to do. And I have to confess, I am kind of jumping out of my skin today about this topic because I just love it so much. You know, Robert, you once wrote that you felt Jesus was the most perfect thing that ever visited this earth. And I couldn't agree more. There is just so much that we can learn from him and his life about truly living the highest wisdom and the highest spiritual values. I mean, you just almost can't even believe such an example exists or could ever have been possible here. So we are looking forward to a great discussion. If you missed our conversation from 2 weeks ago, where we talked about what does Jesus do for us in our spiritual journey, you're welcome to watch that on the Circle's YouTube page. And we also release these conversations as podcasts, so you can find them wherever you listen to podcasts under Exploring A Course in Miracles. I should also mention that this Sunday, March 28th, we will be beginning our Holy Week series here at the Circle, where we are hosting 5 events over 5 days to explore the Course's teachings on the last days of Jesus's life, culminating in Easter Sunday, of course. So if you would like to join us for that, you can learn more and register at circleofa.org/events. If you cannot attend all of the events, the live recordings will be sent afterwards. And if you would like to attend, but you require financial assistance, please email info@circleofa.org and we'll be happy to help. As always, no one is turned away from Circle programming for an inability to pay. So, Robert, hi.
Hi.
That was a lot, wasn't it?
That was a lot. Yeah.
So before we get into our discussion on Jesus, I mentioned earlier that the truly helpful prayer is the basis for our conversation today. It is absolutely beloved by course students for good reason. And you and I will be getting into the meaning of the prayer here in a minute, but just to begin, I thought I would read the prayer in its entirety and then we'll get more granular.
And before you read it, I think
Sure.
it's good to just provide a tiny bit of context. Bill was supposed to go to a conference on rehabilitation in at Princeton, New Jersey, and he didn't want to go. And Jesus gave him a whole discourse about why Bill needed to go, about what in Bill's ego held back from offering rehabilitation, from people who needed rehabilitation, from being truly helpful. And the prayer was the culmination of that discourse. And the prayer is really all about basically getting the self concern that gets in the way of our helpfulness, getting that out of the way so we can be truly helpful rather than caught up in ourselves and how we look and our comfort and so on.
Yeah, I was telling you as we were talking about this that when I used to do speaking engagements, and before, the rooms would get bigger, and before every engagement, I would try and find a way to get into the room itself before everyone got there and just say this prayer again and again and again. And everyone who I've spoken to about the truly helpful prayer has some form of this. Like there's some thing about this prayer that really does what it's intended to do. It shifts you out of that I focus and puts it on service. And it's just for anyone who is in a situation where you have a lot of nervousness and anxiety. This prayer is, and I know you've done the same thing too with your own speaking engagements and whatnot. It's just there's something about this prayer that creates that shift that we're all looking for to get out of our own head.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I will read the prayer here for those who have the CE. This is on page 193. Again, this is the end of chapter 4, and this is the truly helpful prayer. I am here only to be truly helpful. I am here to represent him who sent me. I do not have to worry about what to say or what to do because he who sent me will direct me. I am content to be wherever he wishes, knowing he goes there with me. I will be healed as I let him teach me to heal.
Yeah. I've known that prayer for so long, and I still completely love it. And it still has that effect of taking you out of self-concern and reorienting you towards being helpful to the person you're trying to help.
I know. And there's so many prayers in the course, but there's something about this one that just gets into our soul, like it gets into our bones, and it's so incredibly moving. If I can find it, I'll share a video on the Circles page where you and I went through this a couple of years ago, and I was wanting to read it and I couldn't because I was just crying. I was so emotional about it. And so you had to take over and read
Mhm.
it. There's just, I can't say enough about just what a beautiful prayer this is and what a beautiful idea this is.
And before we dive in and see how the life of Jesus exemplifies the lines of this prayer, I just want to say I'm really glad we're talking about the life of Jesus and talking about his example, because I think course students are often quite comfortable with Jesus being a presence in their life now. I think many course students are, of course, but I think most of us are a bit alienated from his life, because that starts to feel like religion. It starts to feel like judgment. And then there's a lot of blood. And I think that if he is the author of the course, if he is our teacher, then we shouldn't be alienated from his life. We should feel a sense of real connection. And the other thing I want to mention is about his example, because the course, for everyone who's read it, is famously lofty and extreme. It calls us to very, very high places. It's why people, I think, so often have stories of throwing it against the wall and throwing it away and so on. It just seems so extreme and absolute. And in a situation like that, we need examples. We need someone's life to show us that this can be done, that it actually can work, and to show us how inspiring it is when it is done. So we need examples of this material.
I know, and that's why I'm so moved by what you wrote all those years ago about, I think it was an Elder Brother, that Jesus is the most perfect thing to ever touch down on this earth, and his life does provide that example for us. So, okay, let's get to the
Yes.
but I'm dorking out over this prayer right now. So we'll focus. The very first line is, I am here only to be truly helpful. And the only is bolded. And that is interesting to note because if we're here only to be truly helpful, then that states that we're here for no other purpose. And we attribute all kinds of other purposes for our lives. We think we're here to work, raise a family, accumulate wealth, whatever it is. And Jesus is saying, no, you only have one purpose, huh?
Yeah. And we can see the here as being about our lives, or we can see it as being about specific situations. That's what it was for Bill. It was the rehabilitation conference. But yeah, I mean, no matter what situation you're in, saying that first line, I find it reorients me because I'm thinking being helpful maybe is somewhere on the list, but it's not at the top of the list. And in my mind, there's a list, right? It's not just there's only one thing.
And the list usually is filtered through first person objectives, right? Like, what do I want to get out of this? What do I need to do here? It's just very self focused. And if we're here only to be truly helpful, then it takes that focus and turns it outward.
Right. It reminds me a lot of there's a line in the manual about what can go wrong in trying to be a healer. And what he says is the mistake is always some form of concern with the self to the exclusion of the patient.
Mm-hmm.
And it's exactly what he's addressing here.
Well, what is the one qualification of being a teacher of God?
Yeah, well, you make a choice in which you don't see someone else's interests as apart from yours, which means you see their gain as your gain.
Yeah. So incredible idea right from jump.
Yeah.
Was there anything else that you wanted to say on this?
No, let's dive into his life.
Okay. So do you want to go on to I am here to represent him who sent me?
No, I want to say more about how Jesus' life exemplifies
Okay.
this line.
Go
Um,
for it.
well, I think first of all, the reason that it seemed natural to link up this prayer with his life is that almost more than any other life, we think of his life. We know from a young age that his life was dedicated to a mission, right? He had a life given to, some larger purpose. And that larger purpose had everything to do with being helpful. He was constantly healing those who needed healing. He was constantly teaching in the belief that by teaching, he was exhibiting helpfulness. I think there's this great 5-word statement that Houston Smith pulled out from the book of Acts. Peter is giving a speech about Jesus after Jesus is gone. And Houston Smith, in his book, originally called The Religions of Man, he pulled this line out as a summary of Jesus's whole life. And the line was, he went about doing good. And that was everything. So when you think of his life, you think of someone who's disappeared into the goal of being truly helpful. Another form that this takes in the stories in the Gospels is that he's so intent on being helpful that he disregards all the social divisions and religious conventions that would get in the way of that. So, you aren't supposed to be doing anything that is classed as work on the Sabbath. And Jesus is criticized for healing people on the Sabbath. You aren't, especially as a holy man, you aren't supposed to be dining with people who are considered sinners, who are non-observant. They're not, observing the Jewish laws. Um, and he regularly crossed those boundaries too and got criticized for that. So he was so focused on his mission of being helpful that he basically was at it pretty much 24/7 and let nothing, No social conventions, no religious conventions get in the way of that, even though that put him at personal risk. And the term the Course has that kind of captures all of that is special function. We're each given a special function that has to do with being truly helpful. And that is what our lives are meant to become more and more and more about, until our lives are only about that. And in fact, one of the interesting things he says is, several times he says he's in charge of the whole plan of salvation. He's in charge of the whole atonement. He's in charge of the whole sonship, the return of the sonship. And the reason he gives is not what we might assume, which is that he was the first to awaken. He never actually says he was the first to awaken. He says he was the first to complete his own special function perfectly. So the reason that he's in charge of the whole plan of salvation for the world is that he completed his part in that plan perfectly, which meant he learned perfectly how to be truly helpful.
What an amazing idea that one could come here and achieve their part perfectly. We just feel like we're kind of bumbling through this life, very flawed and human and imperfect. And to think that someone could actually come down and do it perfectly. And then when you say that doing perfectly is to set about doing good, I mean, that's
Mm-hmm.
really it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like to be purely good, and that is achieving your part perfectly. And so I think, obviously when we think about Jesus and what a revolutionary he was, he wasn't afraid, as you're saying, to upend conventional tradition, and that is ultimately what got him killed in the end. But his life was just about doing good. And if we're using his life as a model, how much of our lives is about that? I think we may think it's about doing good more than it actually is, because so much of even our doing good actions, really, if you dig underneath them, have some kind of self-service involved.
Sure,
He
sure.
was purely good.
And I think also we have to think about what are the priorities that we attribute to the spiritual life. So often we, especially in Course in Miracles circles, we have found ways to be very suspicious of going about and doing good. And if we look at our spiritual heroes, very often they are defined as our spiritual heroes because we attribute a level of inner realization to them. We have a story that says that they are, extraordinarily realized on a spiritual level. And Jesus is saying in the Course that the whole reason he's in charge, like I mentioned, is it's not defined by his level of realization. It's defined by the fact that he disappeared into being truly helpful.
Right. That's well said. He just disappeared into being truly helpful. And this is why our conversations can go on for like 6 hours at a time. But I just, the other day when we were using the truly helpful prayer as our practice line, you were saying you got faced with some worldly situation and you were like, I'm applying the truly helpful prayer, and it's allowing me to just see this from the perspective of, how can I be helpful in this situation? Even though in the situation itself and in my view of the situation, I was like, oh, you're going to get run over by a truck. Like, because it was a situation where it's like there's a clear loss that could occur for you. And you were just like, well, I'm trying to be truly helpful. And I'm over here like, okay.
Well, the nice thing also is it lifts, and it lifted that sense of self-concern,
Right. And so
right?
you go through the situation differently. You go through the situation more lovingly, and the outcome could be different based on just your attitude going through it. But at the same time, we don't tend to take that as the general assumption. I am here to be truly helpful. Typically, it's I'm here to get my needs met. I'm here to make sure I win in this situation. And so it's times like that where you realize there is a disconnect between the aspirations that we hold and the actions that we take in the world.
Sure. Yeah. When things get hard, we find that we have a more hardened and even vicious ego than we suspected.
Mm-hmm.
Shall we go on?
Move on to the next line, which is, I am here to represent him who sent me.
I love this line in the prayer before getting into how Jesus exemplifies it. I love it because when you are in a situation, you think, I'm here to represent myself. I'm here to make sure I come off looking good, right? And to think I'm here to represent somebody else, it's another way of taking off the table that self-concern that governs us and that messes up our attempts to be helpful. So I don't know if there's, there probably are particular gospel stories we could refer to, but I just think that, we all think of Jesus as, a great, perhaps the greatest example of someone who was a representative of God. It wasn't about him, although I want to get to that in just a sec. But he was there because he was representing someone that we can't see, who needs representatives, visible representatives on earth.
Yeah, because if you think about what it means to represent someone, if you're a president of a company, for example, and you send a representative to an event, that person is meant to be your stand-in, meaning they're meant to uphold the values that you would have upheld had you been there. And so to think that there's someone who came to earth who could so perfectly uphold the values of God,
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. And I think having said that, we need to address this common image, really dominant image of Jesus his whole ministry was about him, right? It's all about how he was the divine, he was the Son of God. His sayings, we often think, were all about that. His miracles were there to demonstrate that. He was just basically on one big trip to represent himself, and put forward himself as, God's own son. And scholarship has really, for a couple centuries now, scholarship has come down resoundingly on the side that those sayings about Jesus, where he says, I am this, I am that, I am the way, the truth, and the life, I am the resurrection and life, I am the bread of life, I am the door, et cetera, et cetera. Those all come from the Gospel of John. And scholars are basically unanimous in believing that's not what Jesus said. And the scholarship has instead swung for a very long time now towards the synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, not John, as more fairly and accurately representing him. And in the synoptics, he barely talks about himself at all. It's all about God. It's about the kingdom of God. His message is not about him. It's about the people he's speaking to and what God and the kingdom of God can mean for their lives. And
How
not
do you
even their afterlife, just their lives. Yeah, go ahead.
how do you think those sayings from John, those self-congratulatory statements from attributed to Jesus got there in the first place?
Because those sayings aren't really echoed in other writings. We do have some other writings, maybe not as early as Matthew, Mark, and Luke. But we have the Gospel of Thomas, we have fragments, we have letters of early Christian leaders. We have a book called the Didache. And the sayings in that larger body are more like the sayings in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and not like the sayings in John. And so what scholars have concluded is that the Gospel of John is the result of decades of kind of reflection on the meaning and significance of Jesus, decades of devotion to Jesus. And as that process went forward, and you could say matured, you might also say deviated, the gospel came out of that community's orientation toward Jesus. It's very easy to, to portray a historical figure very differently than somebody else portrays them and very differently than they were. The interesting thing about the life of Socrates is he had people who were direct disciples, not just Plato, but others who wrote about him, and they portrayed him totally differently than Plato did and then each other. And so it's not a surprise that they would put things in the lips of Jesus that didn't necessarily trace back to him. But scholars are, I think, basically unanimous in saying the way he portrays himself in John, which is so different than Matthew, Mark, and Luke, is not historical. So it wasn't all about him.
And that echoes the way that he speaks of himself in the course as well.
Right. He's really not focused on how amazing he is. It's about God. It's about us, just like in the Gospels. He's there, but he's there as a facilitator of what can happen between God and us.
Yeah, and there's even that quote that from the course, I don't know exactly where it is, but it says that he stands at the bridge between humanity and God, and that bridge is otherwise too great, or that distance rather is otherwise too great for us to get there alone. So he really does serve a purpose in our spiritual journey in that regard, doesn't he?
Yeah, but he makes really clear in the course that the purpose he serves is as one of us, as just an older brother on the path, not as God. And he says, God is the greater one. He says he kneels beside us, facing the light, facing God. So he's very careful to not kind of blur the lines between him and God.
Yeah, and that's something we've done for 2000 years approximately, is elevate Jesus to the level of God, and therefore he becomes, our misunderstanding of Jesus, I think in large part comes from our misunderstanding of God. And God being that I focused, we spoke about this in our Sunday gathering yesterday, where if you're a God who is just about retaliation and vengeance and your own smite, right? Like, then it's easy to put those attributes onto Jesus, and then he becomes a manifestation of that. And so we have God wrong, and so therefore we have Jesus wrong. And so if we have this unconditionally loving image of God that can therefore extend to Jesus as his representative here, then you're getting closer to what you're saying about who he really was 2000 years ago, and you're certainly getting closer to who he portrays himself as in the course. I mean, when we talk about being I'm here to represent him who sent me, in the clarification of terms where it's Jesus and Christ, it says that Jesus was a man who saw the face of Christ and all of his brothers and remembered God. And so there's something, again, just incredibly beautiful about this idea that the way Jesus stands in for God, the way Jesus represents God here, is to see the true nature of everyone and to love and care for them as a result. And that's what we're called to do as well as his representatives here.
Yeah, and I personally think that I think where it went off the rails after he left, after he was gone, was when it slowly switched away from being focused on his teachings, which is where he was focused, to being focused on him. I just think that was a fundamental shift, and that laid the groundwork, I think, for pretty much everything that went wrong afterwards in the history of Christianity. But we probably should get back to so we make sure we get through the whole prayer.
Right. Yeah. Okay. The third line is, I do not have to worry about what to say or what to do, because he who sent me will direct me.
That's a line I think we all love about this prayer, because when you're trying to be helpful, you're thinking, what the heck do I do? What do I say that's going to work here? And that worry seems like a sign that your heart's in the right place, right? You want to make sure that what you say and do will be helpful for the person in front of you, but it becomes its own form of self-concern, right? You're caught up in, what if I say the wrong thing? What if I do the wrong thing? When instead you can rest from that and just be focused on listening for direction from somebody who really does know. And since they know, you don't have to be so worried about doing the wrong thing and saying the wrong thing. So I particularly like that line. It's very anxiety relieving. But in terms of the life of Jesus, I think, again, there probably are some choice gospel stories, but one of the things that just comes through the whole portrayal of him is that he's there to do God's will. He's not there to do his own will. There's the famous line um, from the Garden of Gethsemane, not my will, but thine, right? Our whole image of Jesus is that he was all about doing God's will. Um, and so we associate him with somebody who's receiving direction, who's carrying out a higher will in what he says and does. But the other thing about his life that I feel like is really relevant here, and it's very closely related, is the whole notion of trusting in God's care, because that was a major theme in his teachings. The whole teaching about the lilies of the field and the ravens. They didn't toil and labor to support themselves. God took care of them, and he was the same way. He just went about his ministry. Paul, for instance, who's more like the rest of us, he made a living as a tent maker. So he would go to city after city and make tents and engage people in conversation, and then pull together small churches at the beginning. Those churches would grow, but he was having to make a living doing a normal job. And Jesus just didn't seem to have a house, didn't clearly have a job as we know it. He just did God's will and trusted that he would be cared for, just like the lilies of the field. So I feel like this line is so much about, I don't have to be anxious because he who sent me will direct me. And I think we can add on to that from the life of Jesus. I don't have to be anxious because he who sent me will take care of me.
I know what you're going to say, but I also know that there are many listeners who will be hearing you and saying, well, wait a second, where was God when Jesus was being nailed to the cross? Where was God's care then? What would you say to that?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, he says in the course that was part of his own teaching contribution. That was part of his special function. So it's not that God had abandoned him. God needed him to perform that teaching demonstration. And the fact that God was still there, I think, was shown on Easter morning. Jesus emerged unscathed, and in fact in a higher mode of existence than he
But
had been in.
he was a living demonstration of the message, but the message in this case was nothing can destroy truth.
Right, right. No amount of misperception can have any influence at all on a son of God. That's another way the course puts it. So I do think that we're accurate in thinking of him as somebody who not only was carrying out a higher will, but who was cared for and taken care of by that higher will. And that's another reason why doesn't mean we should all just go quit our jobs and go homeless. Some people are called to do that. I think most obviously aren't. But, we can see in him the fact that we don't need to be anxious and worried while we're going about our efforts to be truly helpful.
And I think we can see that as well in our own lives. We all have stories of ways in which things just serendipitously worked out,
Mm-hmm.
but they're really, when you look close enough, you realize that probably wasn't a coincidence. I was being cared for in that moment. And the more that you can look at your own life and to know that there's a higher hand at work, the more you start to trust that higher hand, and the more you become more willing to not worry about what you say or what you do, knowing that he who sent you will direct you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I I think that with Jesus, there's a quote also in the Course that says, my devotion to my brothers has placed me in charge of this sonship.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a beautiful idea too, because it's his devotion that puts him in charge, not any form of a status as being the quote unquote son of God, because we're all sons of God in the Course. And that's a really um, extraordinary thing as well, that
Yeah.
it's what has made him in charge of the sonship is his service to it.
Right. Devotion's a strong word, especially when you think about it in relation to other people. And I doubt that we use that word very much in course circles or maybe in spiritual circles in general, just because it's such a strong outward orientation, other orientation. Devotion means not just that I'm going to help you now, it means I remain committed to you over time. And to think that that is the defining feature that places Jesus in the role of the leader of the plan is, like I was saying and like you were saying, really telling.
Yeah. And it's also, it's that, again, it's that outward focus, and devotion is a strong word. It's not, I'm here when you need me. It's, I have no other reason to be here but for your care and to walk you home to God.
Yeah.
And again, amazing idea.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else that you want to say on this one?
No.
Okay. So the last line is,
We got two
well,
more.
the second to the last line is, I am content to be wherever he wishes, knowing he goes there with me.
Yeah, I love this one too, because very often when I use it, I'm thinking, it'd be kind of nice to be somewhere else, but I'm here. I'm being asked to be helpful and okay. However, it would be pretty great if I was just relaxing somewhere. And so this is saying you can be content to be wherever he's asked you to be because he's there with you. And the he is capital H here. So I guess we can think it's the Holy Spirit or God. I think originally it might have referred to Jesus. Pretty sure it did.
Because it was a lowercase h.
I th- I'm not sure if it was lowercase or uppercase, but I think yeah, well, I mean, the context for this is Jesus is saying that he arranged for Bill to go to the rehabilitation conference for very important reasons. He's sending Bill there. And then Bill is supposed to say, do not have to worry about what to say or what to do because he who sent me will direct me. I think that was a Jesus reference. Anyway, the point is that if once we go to the place we've been directed to go to in order to be helpful, we can be content to be there because we're not alone. The one who sent us is with us. And so that's why this is also a real favorite line of mine in this prayer. Anyway, to get on to Jesus, this line really fits his life because you don't have the sense of him like having a typical personal life where he had a home and family and a plot of land and a profession, right? And then from there, he branched out to do his mission, Rather, he was so at one with his mission that he didn't seem to have a home. He didn't seem to have a life as we think of a life. He didn't have a wife and children. He didn't have a conventional profession. He just was completely, he's an itinerant preacher. He was on the road. He's spending time with social undesirables, with people the rest of us would very much avoid, to make sure we did not come into contact with them. So he's basically content to be wherever he's guided to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so his life is really a perfect demonstration of this particular line.
And when you marry that with Bill going to the rehabilitation conference, for example, you realize that he's sending us out into the world, which is an amazing idea on its own, but he's sending us to mundane things, right? Like a rehabilitation conference. Jesus knows that Bill would serve a purpose there. And so off Bill goes there. And so sometimes when we hear, I'm content to go wherever he wishes, I have some grand thing that I'm supposed to be doing. And then you realize so much of what the course is referring to is everyday interpersonal interactions, everyday expressions of love, i.e. kindness, everyday places that we go where we're representing God wherever we are. And we can be content with that because he's with us. And it doesn't have to be this grand thing. It can actually be routine,
It
and it's
can
meant to
be,
be.
and it's meant to be happening in the midst of our daily lives. At the same time, I think the Bill example, I'm glad you brought that up, because it's really apt here. Because what I was saying was Jesus was being sent to be with people that we would recoil from, people who had some terrible illness, people who just died, people who were apparently possessed by demons, people who were sinners and you were supposed to stay away from lest they infect you with their sin. And that's very much analogous to Bill's situation, because Bill is going to a conference about rehabilitation. And Jesus was saying the reason he was meant to go was so that he could face his recoil from those. And there was a list of 3 types: those with broken bodies, damaged brains, and weakened or dependent egos, people who couldn't stand on their own 2 feet, who needed like vocational rehabilitation. And what Jesus said was that Bill, his helpfulness was limited by the fact that he recoiled from those people, because his ego thought, that could be me. I could have a broken body. I could have a damaged brain. I could have a weakened or dependent ego. And so what Jesus, his life, you can kind of see a little mirror of in what he was wanting Bill to do. And there's this line in lesson 245 in the workbook, where we talk about, I bring it to the desolate and lonely and afraid. I give your peace to those who suffer pain or grief for loss, or think they are bereft of hope and happiness. And then the prayer says, send me to them. And whenever I go through that prayer or teach it, we're always like, I'm not sure I really love that line, send me to them. Like, those people don't sound like the people I want to be sent to.
I know. And this is, once again, such a perfect example of the spiritual aspirations that we hold and what we actually do in our lives. And I love this example from Bill as well, because we all have situations where we are withdrawing and recoiling from people who remind us of our own vulnerability or potential vulnerability. And you and I have talked about, this is why some people really hate hospitals, because it reminds us of how fragile our bodies are. And so we just avoid it. And what is great about Jesus, and a long list of things that are great about him, is that he just runs into the burning building, if you will. He goes right to everyone who needs his help, regardless of the condition or his own safety, being in the leper colonies and whatnot. And that's a model for us, but how much do we actually follow it? And I confess I'm a Bill in that regard.
Right, right. I mean, I think our prayer is send me to the cool spiritual people who are just like me.
Send me to the mature, wise, uh, evolved people that we can have intellectual discussions with about that. Yeah. And then,
About being sent to the people
right.
with that's the
It's
best of both
pathetic, isn't it?
worlds.
Yeah, it's absolutely pathetic. And
Yeah,
and
which is
that's
exactly what we're doing right now. We're
we're
like
well, we do a lot of service, so I can't come down on us too much. But at the same time, there is an element of truth there, and how much are we, and I'm using the royal we, everyone as we, how much are we really doing this, and what could we do better if we were really following in his footsteps?
yeah, I always think about that line from this ancient Time magazine from when Marianne Williamson's first book, A Return to Love, came out. That Time magazine did like a 1 or 2 page thing on her and on the course. And it talked about her as maybe like the Mother Teresa of, I forget, but she was likened to Mother Teresa because she was reaching out to the AIDS population. Um, and they quoted some unnamed expert on new California religions to talk about the course. And he said, A Course in Miracles, it's the perfect disconnected religion. It allows driven, narcissistic, self-absorbed people to continue in their ways. And here, Marianne, inspired by the course, was doing the exact opposite of what he was saying. But my point is, if we were following more of that example, how much would the course be seen by people out there as just this thing that just allows narcissistic people to just talk with each other and not do anything in the world,
Right.
just
And
do podcasts and
I'm glad I'm glad that you mentioned that was the exact opposite of what Marianne was doing. And this is, I mean, I guess it goes into the prayer, because I really admire Marianne for her work in the AIDS community in California at the time when everyone was recoiling from bodies that were sick. And she was out there in the trenches telling the gay community that there is a God that loves you unconditionally. And I think that work was trailblazing. And I hold her in a lot of respect for that and what she did during that time. And so it was the opposite of narcissistic, what is it?
right,
Spiritual
driven,
students
narcissistic,
continuing on their
self-absorbed.
way. Yeah, I mean that quote. It's catchy, and it's fun to repeat, but it couldn't be more opposed to what was actually happening on the ground with her in California.
Yeah, and it couldn't be more opposed to the attitude of the course itself, but you can't expect, I mean, unfortunately, you're not going to get a quote from some expert on New California religions and have that person be a deep student of what the course actually says.
Right. So
Yeah.
we digress.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else that you want to say on this one?
No, but
Okay.
I've enjoyed the discussion on this one.
Okay. Lively, isn't it?
Yeah.
Uh, the last line in the prayer is, I will be healed as I let him teach me to heal.
Yeah. Well, and I think that line just caps off the whole prayer because it's all about if I just devote myself to being truly helpful or to being truly healing, as this line says, then I'll get what I'm wanting. I'm wanting to be healed. So, what I want for me, I will get if I can just kind of forget about me for a little while and be helpful. Um, and so, I think that's another great line in the prayer. I love every single one of the lines, but how can we not see this line reflected in the life of Jesus. He was known in his time, and there are a few references to him in histories of the time later on, very brief. But he was known for being a teacher and for being a healer. So what he was famous for was for doing healings, and apparently miraculous healings. Um, so we clearly can see him in the part of the line that says, if I let him teach me to heal. And then the part about I will be healed, I associate, of course, with the resurrection. If you look at what was done to him in the crucifixion, it's about the worst thing that could happen to a human body. His body was just absolutely destroyed in a very cruel way. And yet, a couple days later, bang, he's apparently as good as new and better than new. Um, nothing has lasted. He's been completely healed. And I think we can see that, and I think that was a real historical event. I think the evidence for it is quite strong, surprisingly strong. I didn't realize that for a long time until I got into literature. And we can take that as the outcome of he healed, he healed, he healed. And so he was healed. I remember reading a teaching many years ago in kind of a modern offshoot of, it was kind of a quasi Sikh, the Sikhs from India sect. And this teacher was saying, Jesus shouldn't have been going out and healing like he was. Those people were sick because of their karma. And so what happened was he took upon himself their karma again and again and again. And the outcome of taking upon himself all that karma was the ultimate karmic, payback, his own crucifixion. So all that healing is what got him crucified. And what the Course is really implying is the opposite. It's all of that healing is what got him resurrected.
Yeah, when so much of the message of the Course is that an idea is strengthened as it's shared, and that we can only receive what we give. And so wouldn't that make sense that as we heal, then we are healed? And there's a circular that happens in a circular fashion. Like if we want to be healed, we extend love. And so his life was also a demonstration of that. As he healed, the healed part of him strengthened, and then he was able to resurrect as a result. He was that healed that he was able
Right.
to be resurrected.
Yeah, and I think this last line of the prayer, it specifically, although it's only implicit, but I think it's definitely there, it addresses this sense that this is a sacrifice, right? I'm trying to be helpful, I'm trying to heal, but I'm pouring a lot of time and energy away from me. And that same time and energy, if it were poured on me, it'd be great. I would be, in such pleasure and happiness, but I've got to pour it away from me. And this last line addresses that sort of sense of sacrifice. Well, if I pour it away from me, then I get what I want. I'll be healed. Who doesn't want to be healed and whole, rather than fractured and divided? And it reminds me a lot of lesson 345, where basically he says that the prayer has us say, the miracles I give are given back to me in just the form I need to help me with the problems I perceive. So when I give a miracle, it's like,
Comes
lo and
back.
behold, it comes back and my plumbing problem was fixed, easily without me having to, get embroiled in it. So I can just pour myself into being a healer in one form or another, and trust that I get healed and my problems get taken care of. And you really see that with the life of Jesus.
Yeah, and you really see that there's a power in it. like as we're extending love, as we are in alignment with giving and devotion and service, something does come through us, a higher form of wisdom, I believe. And you realize that, like, as you're saying, external situations start to work out a little better. And it's because our mindset is in that place of service and devotion versus, what am I getting out of this? And that's how I think we tend to go through our days, scanning people, scanning external situations for whether or not they do or don't work for us. And
Absolutely.
Jesus's life is such an example of just, well, how can I give? How can I do good? And that's another, we're running out of time here, but that's another misunderstanding, I think, that we have of him, is that he was showing us how to store up riches for the next life. And really what he was teaching then and what he's teaching now is how to just be good people in this one.
Well,
And that we
yeah.
can learn from him as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think his teachings had hardly anything to do with the afterlife. I mean, we think it's all about getting to heaven. He was a wisdom teacher, and wisdom's about right living. And his teaching, so much of it amounted to, if you, forget your cares and place yourself under the care of an unconditionally loving God and extend that care to other people unconditionally, then you can be carefree because God will just take care of you.
Amazing. Do you have anything else that you want to say about this before we close?
Just kind of what I said at the start. It's really good to have a living demonstration. We need those. And it's really good for us as course students to not be so kind of disconnected from the life of Jesus. We shouldn't associate that with like old time religion. We should claim that as ours. This is the life of our teacher, right? Exemplifying the principles that he's teaching us in the course. And it is inspiring. Having gone through each of these lines and talked about how those lines are reflected in his life, it is inspiring. You think, you know what? It's possible to be this egoless and this, unselfconsciously devoted to others.
Yeah, and that's what I've gotten out of these past two conversations. Last discussion that we had, we talked about Jesus's role in our spiritual journey and the way in which he is available to us to be part of our relationships, to help guide us through our day, to help shift our perspective, to help just, he's our partner, he's our elder brother, he's holding our hand as we return home. And this time I'm just thinking, wow, there was someone here on earth who was able to do this perfectly. And we're so imperfect, as we've discussed this whole hour, but someone was. And so that gives me hope that I could be better. And I hope that that's the message that's coming through to anyone who's watching or listening as well, that because Jesus was an example of these principles, we have one, and we can put our sense of self aside and just be devoted to what he's sending us here to do.
Yeah. Yeah. We were reading, I think, in the section we looked at, we studied today, like he says, I have enjoined you to behave as I behaved. And it's like he's actually saying he wants us to act like he did. He adds, but we have to think with the same mind to do that. Behavior comes out of the mind. But still, he wants us to emulate his behavior. And it's an inspiring example, he said. It's a really lofty example, but because it's so lofty, it's powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. We're studying chapter 5, section 3, and he's asking us to use him as a model for decision making. And that's a profound idea. Like what would Jesus do? Right.
Right.
That's a
Right.
fairly basic idea, but it's actually it's everywhere. So it's nowhere. Right. But if we really take to heart what he's saying here, then the question of what would Jesus do, and actually using him as a model for decision making becomes incredibly significant.
Yeah.
Because I know if I ask myself, what would Jesus do compared to what Emily would do, uh, they're more
Uh,
different than I would like to admit, even though I'm admitting it. But um,
yeah, we should wrap
yeah,
it up.
we should close. I know,
Yeah.
but as I said when we opened, this topic, I mean, you can just tell there's so much here, and Robert, I could just keep going for another couple hours, and
Yeah, I want to keep going, but I know we can't.
yeah. So I guess I'll just close with there's a line in the course that says if you saw the, I'm butchering it, but it's like, if you saw the true nature of your brother, if we saw the true nature of each other, we could scarcely refrain from kneeling at his feet. And that's how I feel about Jesus. It's like I can't refrain from wanting to just kneel at his feet. And I don't mean that in any kind of like strictly traditional religious way. I just mean it like, thank you for being so good. And I again, I just think you're right. Like, he was the most perfect thing to touch this planet. And so if we use him as a model for our decision making, we will be better people. And what does this planet need more right now than people who are better, just more evolved, more mature, more selfless,
More
and
helpful.
more helpful? Yeah, because everything that's gone wrong is a breakdown of that. It's a breakdown of being helpful. We are too selfish and we're not helpful. And so hopefully all of this can help us turn it around. So I am really on a soapbox right now. So I'm gonna like get off a bit and say goodbye to everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. If you would like to continue on with us as we continue to discuss the life and the teachings of Jesus, we hope that you will join us for Holy Week, which begins this Sunday. And you can learn more about the Circle's Holy Week events at circleofa.org/events. On behalf of Robert and I and everyone at the Circle, we will see you 2 weeks from now for our next conversation, and looking forward to it.